famous man once said, "We create our own demons." Who said that? What does that even mean? Doesn't matter. I said it because he said it. So now he was famous and basically getting said by two well-known guys. I'm gonna start again. Let's track this from the beginning.
Heyo, Alcatabra here. Like most people nowadays, I'm a big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the fact that it's still making millions after 10 plus years is an often underappreciated feat. Even if you don't like these movies or think that they're overrated, you have to admit that the formula they've established is pretty revolutionary. Disney has taken decades worth of comic book heroes, some of which literally nobody knew, and turned them into household names. I'm even willing to say that Infinity War and Endgame are within the top 5 greatest feats of all filmmaking history. But this video isn't a 10-year retrospective or anything. My point is that I really like all of the MCU movies. Yeah, you heard me. All of them. Yes, I know that there are quote-unquote bad ones like Thor: The Dark World and Age of Ultron, but I don't actually see those as awful films, just mediocre or boring. I can still go back and watch Thor 2 anytime, and that's saying something. But all that aside, I understand why people have their problems with these films. They're welcome to see them as bad if they wish. But I cannot for the life of me understand why people hate Iron Man 3 so much. I was a kid when this movie came out and missed it in theaters, but everyone on the internet kept saying that it was one of the worst MCU films ever made. Then I eventually gave it a watch and now it's in my top 5. So either I just have bad taste, which is totally understandable, or there's something more beneath the surface of this post-Avengers film. So what makes Iron Man 3 so good in my eyes and absolutely awful in others? Well, let's find out. And if you truly are one of those people that despise Iron Man 3, maybe I can convince you to at least credit it for its smaller details. Still, don't expect this to be some sort of intelligent breakdown of every single frame. I can't even pass the SAT. I'm just a guy who likes movies, some of which people really hate, and that's just life, I suppose. Now let's get on with it. First of all, this movie is a lot more serious and mature than most Marvel movies tend to be now. Not as mature as the original Iron Man, but still mature nonetheless. And since people always complain about Marvel movies being too child-proofed, I'm surprised that this one doesn't get any credit for changing that. International terrorism, government corruption, and unethical science? What more do you need for this film to be edgy? People blow up and you see their withered corpses. A guy is shot dead on TV in front of the entire nation. And Tony's sexually charged Playboy past isn't glanced over in the slightest.
Please don't tell me there's a 12-year-old kid waiting in the car that I've never met.
He's 13. No.
Speaking of whom, let's talk about Tony Stark. As in the Tony Stark. This movie highlights the man part of Iron Man more than any other Marvel movie has, with the exception of Endgame, of course. And it features what's personally my second favorite character arc in the entire MCU. Despite being able to soar through the sky and blast lasers out of his hands, the invincible Iron Man is being bested by none other than his own anxiety. This is a really neat twist for an MCU movie since most problems for the Avengers stem from the physical damage that their fights cause. Of course, it should be noted that doing something new or unexpected doesn't automatically make your story good, but Tony's struggle is thankfully written well enough to pass. The aftermath of Avengers 1 isn't just about collateral damage or personal gripes, but trauma as well. And who better to show that trauma through than everyone's favorite superhero? As for his dumbass threat against the Mandarin, I think it was understandable given what he was going through at the moment. Happy was just nearly killed and he felt like the public was seeing through his shell. He wanted the world to think that he was still invincible, even though he was crumbling on the inside. Although he did admittedly get a little too cocky, like when he refused to let Pepper leave the house after he told a terrorist where they lived. Even though it led to a really cool action scene, that was still really dumb. But it's through these bad decisions that Tony is left stranded and out of options, which leads into my next favorite part of this movie, Stark on the Run. I loved Tony's quest to get back home after his mansion was attacked, and it's one of the MCU's few standout plots. Iron Man 3 is more of a hero's journey and less of a hero blowing up CGI monsters for 2 hours. Now Tony must travel undercover amongst everyday people as the world thinks he's dead. That allows for this film to expose the human side of his characters, as I mentioned before. It kind of reminds me of Bruce Wayne in The Dark Knight Rises. Thanks to his overconfidence and growing temper post Rachel's death, Bruce is deprived of his riches, title, and resources in the blink of an eye, all because he got too cocky and challenged Bane head-on. Then he's stranded in some unknown foreign locale while his precious city falls to pieces, because the people of Gotham are hopeless without a Batman to inspire them. Ignoring the fact that Bruce gets back home fully healed and suited up with literally no explanation, Seeing our heroes in such a vulnerable state is really impactful, because they, someone greater than the common man, are being bested. Now they must learn to stop relying on enhanced suits or magic flowers to be a real man, and when they finally do, it's inspiring. This also ties into another complaint that people have for this movie, the fact that there isn't enough Iron Man in it. Tony spends the bulk of this movie using 50% of a working suit and doesn't even have access to it for most fights, but that's not really an issue to me. I don't want to bash on quote-unquote fanboys too much because I myself am a fanboy and there's nothing wrong with that. But Iron Man doesn't need his suit to be interesting. We already got 3 movies of him doing that before this came out, and following those we get 4.5 more. There's enough Iron Man to go around, so for once we can just focus on Tony. But having him on the ropes is what gives this movie its creative style. With his house destroyed and the suits buried underground, Tony has to be tactical for the first time since he left that cave. We haven't really thought about this for some time because Iron Man has always had extra armor in his pocket for easy access, but now he has to best villains with half a suit and his real superpower, intelligence. That's the only way we can get moments like Tony making a microwave bomb or the Barrel of Monkeys rescue. Even during the final fight, he's utilizing brains and strategy to avoid getting his face melted off by extremist soldiers, as well as a shit ton of metal suits, but you get the idea. Anyways, another complaint that I've seen for this movie is its lack of influence, and by that I mean its long-lasting impact on the rest of the MCU. I'm gonna avoid talking about the clean slate protocol for now because I want to save that for the end, but people often cite how this movie has little to do with the rest of the ongoing MCU. The Mandarin, AIM, and Tony's choices never really come up again, which is true, but again, that's far from a problem. Last I remember, people have been begging for a Marvel movie that doesn't have to build towards 5 more in the future. They want real movies with their own stories, like Logan or Guardians 2. So Iron Man 3 is finally the grounded story that we asked for. This is supposed to be a solo movie after all, so it's nice to get a personal story focused on one character and the people in his life. No Infinity Stones, no forced cameos, just Iron Man. That's why it's called Iron Man 3 after all. And while we're here, might as well start talking about the villains.
It's complicated. Hey, it's complicated,
It
right?
is.
It's complicated.
A lot of people were pissed when they found out that the Mandarin in this movie wasn't actually the Mandarin. And if I had to guess, that's probably the primary reason why people hate this movie. But I get it. It feels like a huge middle finger towards the fans who love the character and what he stood for. However, I never minded him being just an actor. I think that making him a fake terrorist was okay and yet another neat twist on standard superhero conventions. To me, this twist demonstrated the various methods of fear that people can use in the MCU. They don't need to be super soldiers or literal gods to pose a threat to the Avengers. It's as simple as putting on a show and killing a dude on camera. Now, I don't really like this phrase due to how it's been butchered by a lot of modern blockbusters, but this twist was a pretty decent way to subvert expectations. While these movies are adaptations, we shouldn't go into them knowing everything that happens. We may have known that Thanos would get all the Infinity Stones, but we didn't know how he'd do it or who we would be losing. That's what made Avengers 3 such an emotional thrill ride. Not to mention that these movies aren't completely comic book accurate anyways. Otherwise, Hank Pym would have built Ultron and Star-Lord's dad would have been a living planet. But like the Mandarin, I'm fine with these retcons. Story adaptations can change aspects of their source material as long as they benefit the story being told. And even if you still aren't convinced, the actual Mandarin is going to show up one day in the MCU, so we'll finally get to see his epic showdown with Tony Stark in Iron Man 4. Oh, right. Aldrich Killian, on the other hand, kinda sucks. Even I'm willing to admit that. I think he should have been more than just an asshole who wanted revenge on Tony for something that happened years ago. I mean, that's kind of what Vulture was in Spider-Man Homecoming, but Vulture had way more to his character and a reasonable drive for his actions. Be careful who you call ugly in high school, on the other hand, is just an angry Syndrome copy with fire powers. Then he dies like a bitch to Pepper at the end, right after declaring that he is the fucking Mandarin.
I am the Mandarin!
No, you ain't.
The only cool part about Killian and AIM was them turning amputees into extremist soldiers. That was pretty badass and is yet another overlooked highlight for this film. Most evil armies in the MCU tend to just be mindless zombies or robots, while the extremist soldiers are real people with intelligence and a ton of power. They're actually a challenge for Iron Man to face and is nearly killed by just one of them on multiple occasions. They also serve as an allegory to the dangers of advancing biological science if you're into that. In all honesty, AIM deserves a second chance in the MCU. Like, they could come back in a tie-in show, or they could actually appear with the real Mandarin in the Shang-Chi film. So, who knows? And then there's Harley. Everybody hates on this little guy and says that he's a bad actor, but I strongly disagree. You can debate the merits of his acting if you want. He's just a kid, but he pretty much represents Tony in his youth, minus all the dough. He's introverted, all brains, and lonely. So Tony sees him as a chance to redeem himself. That's why them bonding over time was really cute and heartwarming. Besides, kids dream of hanging out with characters like Thor and Iron Man all the time. It's not every day that they get to shine alongside big league superheroes, and I'm sure that Marvel's child fans were thrilled by this when watching. However, we now have Peter Parker, and as much as I love Harley, Peter is the one and only Spider-Man. Probably. Tony even got his own kid in Endgame, and you can't compete with that little angel. So while Harley did get to show up at his old buddy's funeral, I doubt that he'll have that big of a role in the future. Then again, they brought back that one dude who got yelled at in Iron Man, so who knows. There's also the comedy.
Ground in 5, 4, 3. Come on! 2.
How did we get this shift?
All right, I'm going to give you a chance to escape. Put down your weapons. Tie yourselves to those chairs. I'll let you live. In 5, 4, bang!
Wow, that was...
You should be gone by now. You should already been gone.
It's alright, I guess. The stakes are high in this movie not because Thanos has arrived or Ultron is attacking, but because this conflict is one for Iron Man to handle on his own, both internally and externally. It's the final chapter to him overcoming his problems and living happily ever after with Pepper Potts. Oh, come on, seriously? Alright, time to address the elephant in the room, an issue even bigger than the Mandarin's retcon. This movie would have worked so much better if we didn't have Avengers Age of Ultron, or Civil War, or Spider-Man Homecoming, or Infinity War, or Avengers Endgame. Iron Man 3 can't be the end of a legacy that it desperately wants to be because it's part of an ongoing cinematic universe. Marvel had way more stories involving Iron Man to tell and way more toys to cash in on. So Tony blowing up all his suits and vowing to be a better person doesn't exactly work, since in the next movie he has 10 brand new ones. And Pepper doesn't even show up again for years. People legit thought that she died off screen before Spider-Man Homecoming came out. Then there's people arguing about how this movie doesn't really explain why Tony has to handle things alone. Captain America, Black Widow, and many other heroes exist in this universe. They would gladly lend Tony a hand to beat AIM and save Pepper, so one might ask, why doesn't he just call them?
It's complicated,
It
right?
is.
It's complicated.
While it's not perfect, I'd argue that the Avengers weren't exactly a team by that point. They joined up to fight Loki and then went their separate ways until 2015 after the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D. Maybe that's why there were no Avengers in Winter Soldier either, but you can take that as you will. That aside, Iron Man 3 is still really good. It does have some issues regarding the plot and characters, but I could argue that for any Marvel movie. And as long as a plot hole or inconsistency doesn't outright destroy your movie's logic, then you can still have fun. And that's the real lesson to all of this. Fun. We're watching comic book movies starring a kid with spider powers and Scarlett Johansson's ass. That doesn't mean your movie is allowed to be incoherent or messy, but it should still be fun above all else. Look, I'm a fan of Marvel just as much as anybody else. And Tony Stark is definitely one of the MCU's biggest characters. He's had his ups and downs, but Iron Man 3 is definitely not a low point. Unlike most Marvel stories nowadays, there's a real conclusion to his character. While it's still a glaring issue that it gets retconned by the next Avengers films, that complaint should fall on those movies instead, not this one. I'm just throwing this out there because there's a lot of pressure surrounding the overall Marvel movie system and what films it contains. I also needed to make a video on this channel about movies for once, but that's not the point. With 20 plus stories leading up to Endgame and beyond, it's no surprise that there are some cracks along the road. While this movie doesn't add much impact-wise towards the MCU as a whole, it doesn't really have to push any kind of... Wait a second, is that Bill Maher? In the end, Iron Man 3 is the personal journey of a once egocentric man-child turned defender of humanity. It's about the real human struggle behind an emotionless mask, and it reminds us why Tony is so relatable in the first place. Even with all of his money, brains, and witty dialect, we as everyday geeks can still relate to him, because he struggles on the inside just like any person would. He may be gone now, and might even get replaced someday, but there's one thing that this film definitely showed me, it's that Robert Downey Jr. is, and forever will be, So this is the end of the video where I just spew nonsense that I didn't write down, and hopefully you get distracted enough that you like the video or something. But in all seriousness, I hope you did enjoy the video. If you did enjoy it, give it a like, and if you'd like to see more like this, please comment below and be sure to subscribe. Anyways, like I mentioned at some point in this video, this is like the start of my first official like movie-based rant discussion video and stuff. I've done like 2 rant discussion videos in the past about like My Hero Academia, which I don't know. I mean, I'm still gonna do like anime reviews and show reviews as well as movie reviews, most visual medium like that. So be sure to stick around. Also, be sure to check out our podcasts that we do on this channel, me and my friends, based on movies and stuff. If you enjoy this, we're going to do one about Marvel soon enough. It may come out before or after this, I don't know. Point is, I'll be seeing you around, hopefully. Alcatraz out.